Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome to Ketiso's first virtual conference. So I'm going to begin with the introduction, and we will keep our fingers crossed that Professor Krashen is here and can continue afterwards. So it has been said that you should never meet your heroes because you may be disappointed, but that cannot be further from the truth when it comes to Professor Stephen Krashen. From inspiring the readers of his more than 500 research articles and more than a dozen books in the fields of literacy, language acquisition, neurolinguistics, and bilingual education, to meeting him in person for the very first time, he makes every single old and new language acquirer, instructor, and scholar feel welcome and significant. As the most frequently cited scholar in the world in second language acquisition, he always invites everyone to remember that we're all in this profession for the common good, and it is our responsibility to reduce suffering in the world when it comes to language education. Also, as the holder of a black belt in Taekwondo, a form of martial arts that we both have in common, the 1977 Incline Bench Press Championship of Venice Beach, and one of the best senses of humor, he sure knows how to make the world a better place by encouraging everyone to optimize their potential as well as their comprehensible and compelling input. Yay, Dr. Kashi is here. Okay, perfect. I can go on and on, but unfortunately have to keep the introduction short due to time limits for someone who we all know needs no introduction. So, dear attendees of the CATISL virtual conference, please join me in welcoming Professor Stephen Krashen to give his three short talks, perspectives on individual differences, writing, and pronunciation. We're waiting for you, Professor Krashen.
So here's the question. Do some people have special talents for language acquisition? Okay. Actually, I have another set of notes. I don't think I'll give one is called How to Get Rich Through Real Estate. I don't think I'll give that one here. Okay. This is about special talents. That's the first one. And let me tell you how I got interested in this. I spent about, 10 days in Hungary. This is, a number of years ago, probably 10 years ago. And I was invited to give a short course at the university. And I gave my lectures. And after one lecture, one of the students said, while you're here, you should meet a lady named Lomkato, Lombkato. She explained to me that Lomkato was a national treasure in Hungary. Everybody knew all about her. The claim is she spoke 17 languages. And I said, I would love to meet her. She said, fine, I will call her up and see if I can make an appointment. So she told me what happened. She called Lomkato and said, Steve Krashen is here. And Lomkato said, who is that? And that was the beginning. And yes, I'll see him. Okay. And I was in a city called Page, which is about 2 hours south of Budapest. And I went 3 times into Budapest to visit Lomkato. It was absolutely wonderful. Oh, my colleague there said, you better hurry. She's 86 years old. So get down there. So I went there, spent a lot of time with her. And she was the real thing. She told me her story. She was born and raised in Hungary, monolingual Hungarian, and only got interested in languages when she was in her 20s. She was teaching. She started out with French. She had gotten a PhD in chemistry from the university at Page, and then decided she was more interested in learning some languages. So she studied French and took students in French and was kept about one lesson ahead of the students, but basically put it together. Her main way of getting better in languages was reading. She didn't travel. She didn't go to other countries. When she became a famous translator, she did translation jobs in other cities, but not for very long. But she did it herself. And if you've been to Budapest, you know that Budapest is not especially a bilingual city. It's basically Hungarian. When I was there, the other language that people spoke was German, and they weren't especially good at it. And now, of course, English is taking over. And I got to tell you, when I was there, I spent, we spoke English, by the way. Her English was absolutely superb. I met with a lot of locals in Hungary, professors of linguistics, people involved in language teaching. I gave some talks at the universities in Budapest, and I tried to take advantage of my relationship with Lom Kato. Lom Kato is a personal friend of mine. People used to say, Barack Obama is a personal friend of mine, or whoever is a famous person. So I used that. And people knew who she was. But what's interesting is that nobody knew much about her. These are professors of language acquisition, etc. They hadn't read her book, which she wrote in Hungarian. They hadn't heard her speak. They hadn't read any of the articles. All they could say was, oh, she's different. She has a different brain. I said, what could be different about her brain? Does she have a more fluid corpus callosum? Does she have two left hemispheres? Or what? And they never could come up with any details. In other words, people just decided she's different, but couldn't say why. I think Lom Kato is an excellent example of the correctness of what we call optimal input. Let me tell you what this is and why she was a good example. The version of the theory I'm working with today, heavily influenced by my colleague Benico Mason. Benico has convinced me that comprehensible input is not the whole game. It's there and you need it, but it's only part of it. What we really want is optimal input. And optimal input, we've sort of decided this is our hypothesis at the moment, has 4 components. First of all, yes, comprehensible. That doesn't mean every word is comprehensible. You can still acquire language if there's a little bit of noise in the input. Optimal input is compelling, so interesting that you forget that you're listening to another language. There's a lot of it, not just a small amount, lots and lots of input. I+1 is present in the input, but it's there anyway. You don't have to seed it. You don't have to make sure it's there. If you give people lots and lots of optimal input, the next rule that they're ready to acquire is going to be there in the input. And my hypothesis still is that Lom Kato got a lot of optimal input. She generated it herself. She made sure she got it. Her main method, as I mentioned, was reading. She would always buy 2 books at once because not both of them might not be as interesting as she'd like. So she wanted truly interesting input. She went to other countries, but when she was there, she used the opportunity to get comprehensible input. As you know, immersion on its own is not nearly enough. You can be in a country for years and not get enough input to make any difference. You have to make sure you get the right kind and enough of it. She would go on guided tours in museums and go on the same guided tour with a different tour guide on the same topic, on something she was very, very interested in. She went to the movies. She did everything she could to convert this immersion experience into an optimal input experience. So I think this is the name of the game now. For me, it is anyway, a few of us. What happens when people get this optimal input? The claim is that when you get optimal input, everybody makes about the same progress at the same rate. When you have optimal input, individual differences disappear. I've talked to Lom Kato about this. You think so some people are gifted for language? She said, no, some of us just know how to do it. I've gotten similar answers from Steve Kaufman, another very, I was going to say gifted linguist, but that's not true. Another highly proficient polyglot. They all say pretty much the same thing. Anybody can do it. You just have to find the right situation. Well, I think we found a way to start this out, to look at some data that really comes out very, very neat. It's not the only one, and it's one of several sources of input we have. My colleague, Benico Mason, as I've just mentioned, for many years, taught English as a foreign language in Japan. And the core of her course, once you reach a certain level, is reading. Pleasure reading that's self-selected. In the early stage of the course, the students, she helped them find books when they needed help, etc. If they got books that they wanted, it has to be self-selected, things they genuinely want to read. And on the handout, wherever it is in your portion of the universe, you can see what they read. They read somewhat different things. A lot of young people's literature, which I think is some of the best, but not exactly the same. Here's one subject who was fascinated by Judy Blume, probably the greatest living author in the English language, in my opinion. Some of them read graded readers. They combined graded readers with what we call the classics now, Harry Potter. Some of them read Louis Sachar, other things, Holes, another one, Twilight. One guy read basically Harlequin romances. I want to meet him. That should be quite interesting. And he made terrific progress. We then asked, what Beniko asked the students to do was to keep a log of what they were reading. All we wanted was the book, the number of pages in the book, amount of time, etc. From that data, we could, and we gave them pre and post tests. These are students who asked Dr. Mason for extra help when the course was over that she taught. And she said, I'll be glad to help you. I'll help you find books, but keep this log for me and take pre and post versions of the TOEIC test. Those of you who know about the TOEIC, you know that this TOEIC fever all over Asia. People in Japan, Korea, Taiwan, all take the TOEIC, and everybody knows about it. You need a certain TOEIC score to get jobs. If you get a high TOEIC score, you're excused from the English requirement in the school you're at, etc. When you get a job, you need to gain a certain amount in the TOEIC. Okay, so everybody knows there's one guy in Japan who, this guy has no life. He takes the TOEIC every year and always gets 100% and always gets his name in the paper. This is not a great hobby, if you ask me. So we had these TOEIC scores. And what we did was do correlations with how much time they put in and what their TOEIC scores. Here's the big result, and then I'll get to an even bigger one. The correlation between the amount of time put in and TOEIC scores was nearly perfect. For statistics fans like me, correlation to 0.94, which is about as close as you can get to perfection. The more they read, the more they did pleasure reading, self-selected pleasure reading, the better they did on this examination. We did the analysis, regression analyses, and we looked to see if it mattered if they did other things. Didn't matter if they did test prep. Didn't matter if they studied vocabulary on their own, if they listened to the radio. What counted was the TOEIC score. The others made minuscule or nearly zero contributions to their proficiency. Okay. Oh yeah, here's their ages. Age 21 to 78. One guy 78 years old. That's really encouraging. Anybody can do it at any age. I then did an analysis that allowed me to judge the amount of variation. And what I found was I divided into the slowest, people who made the slowest progress, and the people who made the fastest progress. Not all that much difference in their progress. We found for our students, for the average student who did this reading gained a little more than a half a point for every hour they read. They gained a little more than a half a point on the TOEIC. And as you can see, if someone reads an hour a day for a year, 300 hours, 2 hours a day, 300 hours a day, this predicts that you can make quite spectacular progress. You can go, as we say, from 0 to 60, probably 0 to 90 these days. You can go from the lowest levels, just barely good enough to read, all the way to the top. Acquirers. If we looked at just lowest acquirers, they still made very, very good progress. And it was easy for the slow readers to catch up to the fast readers with like a year of reading or so. Conclusion, not that much individual variation. Gifted does not exist. Language acquisition, Chomsky is right. Language acquisition is natural. It's something that we are born to do, that the brain does very, very well. And when the conditions are right, everybody goes quickly. The trick is not grim determination. The trick is not motivation. The trick is getting the right input that's so interesting that you forget that it's in another language. I'm very interested in this idea of self-selection. I'll give you my favorite example of this. This comes from Garrison Keillor, a radio commentator. He says that when people find out that I was an English major, they always give me classics, gifts. So on my shelf is Charles Dickens and the Bronte sisters and all these things. All of them great with a capital G. None of them read by me. He says every time he passes the shelf with all these gift books, he feels them staring down at him, making him feel guilty. And you dread the day when this friend of yours gave you these nice books with good intentions, asks you, how did you like blah, blah, blah? And you haven't touched it. That's the problem with gift books, in my opinion. It just doesn't work. It needs to come from you, something you want to read. In fact, I rarely pay attention to recommendations. People say, you really got to read this book, et cetera, et cetera. There's only one person. When he makes a recommendation, I absolutely follow what he says immediately. The next thing I do is get the book. And that's my son, because he knows me better than I know myself. And he kind of knows, in fact, he really does know what I should be reading next. But you're lucky if you have a person like that in your life. In general, you've got to get it yourself. You get it yourself. When it's self-selected, the input is compelling, especially when you feel you have the right amount to finish the book. So let me leave this here at our hypothesis. Do some people have special talents? No, it's all in getting the right kind of input. Okay, my next topic is writing. What about writing? Let me state this. Writing is output. We acquire language from input. And this is confirmed by studies that say that the more writing people do, if you do a lot of writing, it will not result in better writing. Writing style, the form, comes only from reading. It doesn't come from writing. That's where we get it, which is consistent with the input hypothesis. What I'm about to tell you, I'm very enthusiastic about sharing because I didn't do any of this research. I read about it from other people. And it's because of these other people who worked on what we call the composing process that I owe a great deal of what success I've had. They have given us terrific advice on how to use writing. Writing doesn't cause language acquisition. It does something different. Writing helps thinking. You put something down on the page, you look at it, and you come up with a better idea. The brain just can't help it. We use writing to solve problems and make ourselves smarter. One of the leaders of this field who worked in the composing process was Peter Elbow, and it was so nice. We presented together at a conference, and I got the chance to thank him for helping me with all my work. They came up with the composing process, and all of you have heard of this. I think it's wonderful. The composing process are ways of avoiding writer's block and ways of using writing to solve problems and make yourself smarter. Revision is the main component. Here's Neil Simon. Mediocre writers write, good writers rewrite. Kurt Vonnegut. Writing allows even a stupid person to seem halfway intelligent if only that person will write the same thought over and over again, improving it a little each time, like inflating a blimp with a bicycle pump. Anybody can do it. All it takes is time. The single most important sentence here, which has helped me in all aspects of my life with any writing, was Ernest Hemingway. And when I recite it to you, this is not me talking, this is Hemingway. The first draft of anything is shit. That is so unbelievably liberating. In my private life, and not so private anymore, because I'm going to tell you about it, in California, for the last 10 years, I've been involved in show business because there's a California law that says if you live in Southern California, you must be involved in show business. So I've taken that very seriously. And I have written 10 musicals, and they've all been performed. I sometimes am in them when someone doesn't show up because I know the script, and I do it for the synagogue. It's our annual Purim play. We call it the Purim Spiel for the holiday of Purim to tell the story of the book of Esther. Now, when I do this, I usually procrastinate. I know the play is going to be sometime in March, April. We're delaying it, of course, this year. But and we usually I have the story is the same. It's the book of Esther. And I always procrastinate. When am I going to start? When am I going to start? We take it from a movie usually. Like one year we did Frozen. That was really fun. And of course we did the Queen movie, etc. And we changed the words around like Weird Al Yankovic does. And the cast is always the people in the choir, where we all sing and get ready for the holidays. And they always want to know, what are we doing this year? What are we doing? Well, I'm waiting for inspiration, waiting for inspiration. Nothing happens until I remember Peter Elbow, until I remember Vonnegut, and I remember especially Hemingway. Sit down, start to write. First day, and I have to be regimented. I'm going to do this for 5 minutes. Sometimes I get nothing done, one sentence. Within 2 weeks, the first draft is done. These people are so correct. I'll return to that in a little while for a grand finale. Good writers, the composing process tells us, plan. They have an outline or whatever they do, but they're willing to change the plan. In fact, you've got to change the plan because as you're writing, you're getting new ideas. And you realize that this is not really the idea. I have some better ideas. Let me put those in. They're willing to change their plan. The enemy of writing is a rigid plan that you feel you're not allowed to change. But that's the nature of writing, coming up with new ideas. So good writers, flexible plans. Third point, rereading. Here's Hemingway. I arrive at first light and start by rereading and everything I've written. The big block that people have is they forget where they are. And you don't remember even where you were yesterday. If you reread what you did, you'll see your subconscious has been working on it. You have better ideas, and you know exactly where you are. The fourth one, which is universal, delay editing. Peter Elbow says, pretend you've hired an editor. And the editor is going to go over your final draft and make changes. Don't do it while you're writing. Pretend you've hired an editor, and of course you hire yourself to do that. If you worry about editing as you go and you make sure the spelling is right, you won't be concerned with your ideas, and the creative process will not happen. Also, what you're writing now is not necessarily your final draft. So there's no reason to edit anything until you know you're finished or have decided that's enough. As all of you know, you don't put on your makeup until you're done with your shower. Don't put on your makeup before your shower. I would never do that, okay? Wait till the final moment. So these are the 4 basic components. I've added 2 more. One is incubation. When you're stuck, get up, walk around, do something absolutely mindless. You need an interval free from conscious thought to let the subconscious come up with solutions. This comes from a famous mathematician who some people say he should have gotten credit for relativity because he created the mathematics that made it possible. It's a man named Poincaré, and his articles were published about 100 years ago. And he said, when I'm working on math and I have a problem, I'm stuck. I get up, do something mindless, put wood on the fire, come back, and you'll find in 2 minutes the problem is eased up, the log jam has dissipated. And other people have said this too. This is just about a universal. People understand the importance of taking breaks, not breaks where you work on something creative, the inauthentic labor of life, like, filing, doing dishes, things like that, are really designed for writers for incubation. Final one, daily, regular writing. This makes sure that when an idea comes, you'll be there to pick it up. People have different techniques for doing this. Irving Wallace, author, did an article about this published in a journal. He found good writers, fiction writers, Some of them count the number of words, make sure they do a certain minimum. Some of them do pages. Some of them by the clock. Really doesn't matter as long as it's regular. So when I get stuck with my Purim play, I say, I'm just going to do 5 minutes. I'm just going to do 10 minutes. It doesn't take that much, and the ideas start to come. The major part of the talk is coming right now. Inspiration is the result of writing, not the cause. Don't wait for an idea. I can't skip. This is a mistake I make every year with the Purim play. I keep doing this. Sit down and start writing, and it will come. A couple of great quotes with which I will end this session. Don't wait for the muse. This is Stephen King. Your job is to make sure the muse knows where you're going to be every day from 9 till noon, 7 till 3. The big one, of course, comes from one of our favorite authors, Madeleine L'Engle, Science Fiction for Kids. Here it is. Inspiration usually comes during work rather than before it. This is so unbelievably true. Single most important. What I did here today is I deliberately chose not just to talk about academic writing, but to tell you about the creative show business writing I do, because I have found that this applies to all creative writing, all of it. It goes for research, it goes for creative writing as well. Should we test writing? I say no. First of all, testing writing is difficult. It's expensive. Kids hate it. How do you prepare for it? They'll start writing more. They won't become better writers in terms of style by practicing writing. They'll get there by reading. That's where it comes from. And the more writing they do will not help at all. It's also the most difficult to get reliability measures, et cetera. It's hard to grade, and it's expensive to do. You have to have people write, you have to people grade them. You never get into rate of reliability. My opinion, don't bother, don't test it at all. I have one more presentation, and fortunately for you, it's pretty short. I want to talk about accent. One of the many things I've learned from my son is how to use the right terminology. He is a mathematician. He's a professor of mathematics. Children succeed where their parents fail, let me tell you. And what Danny has taught me is how to use the word conjecture. When you have a hypothesis and you think it's pretty flimsy, call it a conjecture. Then if it turns out to be wrong, you can always say, well, that was a conjecture, don't worry. So I'm calling this a conjecture. I think it deserves our attention, though. The conjecture is this: pronunciation, getting a better accent in another language. Within a short time, you acquire the accent. It's all there. Deep inside of you is the perfect Mexican Spanish accent, the perfect Canadian French accent. It's all there. We don't use our best accents because we feel silly. It's not us. Let me give you some of the evidence for it, and the evidence is pretty flimsy, but I still think this might be correct. Our accents in other languages are variable. It depends on how we feel. I'll give you my experience, not because I'm different, but because you're the same way. My accent in French, I'm told that sometimes I speak French without a trace of a French accent. Sometimes it's pretty good. Remember once in Paris, I was there with my daughter, and we were at one of the cafes, and I had made an appointment with a French sociolinguist. And we spoke French. We talked about her research, and we had a great time because she wanted to know what my ideas were, and I love talking about that, as you see. And when it was done, my daughter, who was a child at the time, she was around 12, she was going to a French school, and her French was really good. She was over playing video games. She would come over and talk. She said afterwards, Dad, your French was really good. Your accent was the best I have ever heard it. There was nobody there. There was nobody listening. There was no reason to be nervous, and I was so engrossed with the conversation. Another experience, which I'm sure you've had, I've done some research at the University of Ottawa. I had a postdoctoral fellowship there in 1981. In 1982, I went back to talk to the research teams. We did the first studies in sheltered subject matter teaching. And I worked with both French and English, and we had this meeting with the French group. And I was running the meeting, And in the French group were people I knew quite well and I was very comfortable with. Like my friend Hubert, we used to spend Saturdays together. Kids were the same age. We'd go over to Ottawa, to Hull rather, across the river, go roller skating. And he never spoke English to anyone because he was one of these Vive Quebec Libre, one of these. And it was very easy to chat with him, chatted with his kids. So, and he was in the room. So I felt good. My French teacher, I took a class in French and we had a very good relationship. So I felt fine. Then the door opened. I thought, and I didn't think about how I was doing. We were just doing the meeting. The door opened and a stranger walked in, a faculty member. I didn't know who he was. I thought, oh my gosh, I must be making a total fool of myself. I'm sure my accent is wrong. I'm sure I'm making errors in subject-verb agreement. My French collapsed on the spot. And there was nothing I could do about it. It was completely subconscious. We don't have control over this. It depends on how we feel. Some studies, and there are a couple more now than the one on the handout, they looked at people's accent with sober, with an ounce and a half of Jack Daniels in another language. The curve went like this. Here's your accent baseline. You have the booze, it goes up, and then time goes on and your bad accent comes back. The output filter, I'm claiming there's an output filter. It's not the same as the input filter. The output filter prevents you from performing your best because of these affective factors. So the alcohol study supports that. Earl Stevick, wonderful, wonderful scholar, used to teach Swahili for the Foreign Service Institute. He said he had 3 students in his class. One student was the best, way up there. Another was kind of in the middle. Another was not so good. The best one had to leave. His assignment changed, his military thing, or foreign service. As soon as the top one left, the second one suddenly got a lot better, more fluent, better accent, because this inhibiting force of someone being better than you and kind of competition was gone. So this is the idea. We think there's an output filter. It's not under our control. Peter Ustinov talked about this. If you've seen him in French movies, I've seen him in French movies, he sounds just great. He says, my accent in movies is very good, but on the street, just speaking French, I'm not nearly as good. The accent returns. It's when you're feeling anxious, a little nervous, the output filter goes up. Let me make an analogy. Let's talk about clothing. Clothing has 2 functions. One function is to protect you from the weather. The other function is to mark you as a member of a social group. I am sure you're all dressed appropriately today, and so am I, at least my top half. You won't know about the bottom half. I'm dressed as a person giving a presentation, a webinar kind of lecture in a kind of academic institute, et cetera. And when I go to class, I'm dressed appropriately. I think a good marker of this is shoes. My entire academic career, I've always worn walking shoes or jogging shoes that are solid black. A lot of men do this, and that's because if you're on your feet the whole time, you get uncomfortable with hard formal shoes. I've noticed everybody does that. But what if I found jogging shoes that had a red stripe on the back? It wouldn't work. We know these rules of how you're supposed to dress, and you follow them because you know it marks you as a member of a group. So language does the same thing. Language is for communication, but it also marks you as a member of a social class, and accent is the most sensitive marker. The moment someone opens their mouth, you know who they are. You can even tell sometimes where they're from, what their attitudes are, etc. So it tells you what club you've joined, to use Frank Smith's terminology. And your accent will not be perfect unless you consider yourself to be a potential member of the club. Now, what if we gave accent improvement classes? I've looked at the research on accent improvement, and very few of the methods have ever been tested. They sell very well because everyone wants to train themselves, have a great accent. What if they worked? I think if you could change your accent, if I could say, make my French accent to be 100% Montreal, 100% Paris, it wouldn't be me. What I want to do, consciously and subconsciously, is speak French as a second language at a very high level. That's the idea, not to so that students will think I'm French, which I can, do for maybe a minute and a half, and then they realize I'm not. So this is the idea. The problem is our standards on accent are ridiculously high. It's 100% or nothing. Good example, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Arnold, people say, oh, his English isn't that good. They haven't been listening. Arnold Schwarzenegger's English is amazing when he gives a speech or especially when he's interviewed. His grammar, his syntax, his ability to choose the absolute right word in English is wonderful. He's excellent. He has a small accent. That's it. I would say he has acquired probably 99% of the English phonological system. Our standards are 100%. That's the problem. People are not satisfied. So let's relax our standards. Let's invite everybody into the club. Accents will get better. I think there is no sense in doing accent improvement classes. There's been either no research or I looked at all the commercial series I could find. None of them give any evidence that they work. I have never seen evidence that accent training helps unless you test the people in a situation where they can monitor their own speech. If you give someone instructions and you ask them to read a list of words in a column, you can remember the rules like, gee, I got to remember to pronounce the final vowel, okay? Then it'll get better. But in the real world, when you don't have time to apply the conscious monitor, you won't have a perfect accent. Don't worry about it. Forget it. You're doing quite fine with your 99%. So that is my presentation today. I don't have time to do getting rich through real estate in a declining market. Maybe next time. And do we have any questions? Oh, by the way, you have to start your question with how wonderful my talk was. Then you can go on to.
You're like wonderful. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Can you hear me now, Professor Krashen?
Yes. Yes,
okay,
ma'am.
perfect. We have so many comments. I think we have more than 400 participants. So I couldn't even catch up with all the positive comments and everything that everyone was saying.
400 people? I'm going to double my fee.
I think so.
Okay.
You should. Absolutely.
Yes. If you know the math, that doesn't amount to anything. Okay.
I know, right? So I'm going to go with the priority of the questions because the participants could upvote the questions. So I'll go with the list. So the first question, Judith is asking, how can you provide optimal input for a beginner or a student with interrupted education with missing gaps in native language learning?
Okay, great question. Good questions are defined as those I have a ready-made rehearse answer to, and that's this one. The problem is not the theory. The problem is the way we treat kids in school. If you ran the zoo, if you were in complete control of the linguistic environment, you would know exactly what to do. You'd find good stories, you'd have interesting conversations, you'd have the child read good books, and you wouldn't be in a hurry because rate of progress is not under conscious control. Language acquisition goes beautifully at optimal speed when input is optimal, and all of you would do that. You would find ways of providing optimal input that's perfectly comprehensible, that's rich, and there's a lot of it, etc. So the answer is not changing the child, it's changing school, of course. And I would begin always with the library. Beniko Mason, teaching English in Japan, managed to assemble a collection of 5,000 English graded readers.
Wow.
That's what we're talking about. Lots of good reading. And I would have audio section, read aloud times, etc.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So Chase is asking, why reading? I agree that we as humans have an innate ability to learn language. So it is interesting why our first language is developed via oral language. And now we have this data that shows pleasure reading is the key to developing our L2s. So again, why reading and not pleasure listening or pleasure conversation,
Oh,
for
pleasure
example?
listening is fine and pleasure conversation is great. The reading is where you get the sophisticated language, of course, unless you're in an environment of hearing lots of sophisticated language around you. By the way, Dr. Ashtari and I are working on a case trying to discover why a person we know who lives in the United States and speaks Farsi, Persian, as a second language, how he got so good in it. He's really, really good. He sounds native and he can say anything. He does professional intellectual comedy, etc. We found out, and you'll be the first ones to get our research report right now. Turns out his dad, Farsi speaker, mom, native English speaker, his dad had a machine shop or an automobile repair shop. And this young man, whose name is Tehran, if you can catch his act, he's really good. Anyway, from age 5 until he went off to college, he hung out with his dad at his dad's automobile repair shop. He was responsible for translating documents, etc. And his dad's friends would hang out all the time, and he would talk to them. So he was getting sophisticated, entertaining input in Farsi. Now, what they say about Persian men, so far that I can tell, is absolutely true. They're quite clever, they like to talk, and they're good conversationalists. And he was surrounded by that for all of his youth. He took classes, heritage language Farsi classes, and like everybody else, he hated them. He got nothing from it. So when you find someone who has done it, it's because they've managed to get this kind of input. Now, what Tehran got was quite rare. Most people won't get it orally. They get it through reading, which works very, very well. Okay, great question. Next one.
I think I'm going to combine these two questions because you've already kind of answered this one. Bahia says, how do you determine what amount level of input is optimal for a group of students? And Judith is saying, so how does optimal input differ from comprehensible input? How are they the same, or how do they work?
Here's what you do with tough questions. You say, oh, I'll get to that later. And then they forget that they asked the question. So I'll do Judith's first.
Sure, good. Sounds great.
Okay, what was your question again? Tell me.
How does optimal input differ from comprehensible inputs?
Comprehensible is one component of optimal. It's not enough. It's got to be compelling. There has to be a lot of it. It needs to be rich. Some people say you should acquire a language through music. Music doesn't work very well because there's not a lot of it. It's not very rich. If you want to do German and you do Dichterliebe and you can do all these great poems, yeah, you'll get a lot of it, but it's still, you need more than that. Most music, most popular music, does not have enough in it. Let me recite for you verbatim a popular song, which was popular about 10 years ago. This is why. This is why. This is why I'm hot. This is why I'm hot. You ain't, because you not. This is why I'm hot. That's the whole song. It keeps repeating, okay? You're not going to go very far on stuff like that. It might be entertaining. It might be clever. I think it's a neat song, actually. But it won't cause sufficient amounts of language acquisition. So that's why reading is by far the best way. These other things don't do it very much, even though they're comprehensible. Comprehensible, necessary, but not sufficient. Now, I've forgotten the first question. Nishan, do you have it down there?
Of course. How do you determine what level of input is optimal for a group of students?
We don't know. I have no idea how much. We do know that we're not providing anywhere near enough. What you do is you look at case histories and you put them all together. And we have a great case history that Kim Suk-cho did of a child who got into reading contests in Korea, and her English was great. I met her in Korea. I bought her ice cream. It was great. She's like 12 years old. And she read at least 400 books, at least, probably a lot more. Kyung Suk says you're really not going to get anywhere till you do 300 graded readers, 300 good stories. So we're getting a feel for this. What we know is that it's more than we thought. In the old days with traditional language classes, you get small portions from a textbook of boring reading. Small amounts of boring reading will not do it. Then you jump to totally authentic reading. One of Beniko's many contributions is she has claimed that you really need a lot more than we thought. Her kids will do very easy reading for 2 to 3 years. These are high school students. Then they go on to the authentic stuff. That's more like it. When I look at my background and the languages I know, the ones I know fairly well, I've done a lot of easy reading, tons of it. Those are the ones I'm good at. Languages I'm not good at, I have not had the chance to do lots of easy reading because it's not there in the environment. The languages I don't know very well, I'll tell you what they are. Have you found many books written in Amharic? No, that's Ethiopian. I spent 2 years in Ethiopia. I got basic conversational and never got quite beyond that because there wasn't much to read and I didn't have deep conversations with people. Same thing with Hebrew. There's liturgical texts and I'm pretty good at those, but there aren't too many easy novels in Hebrew that will keep my attention. Chinese, Mandarin, I only know 3 authors who have written really interesting books in Mandarin that are good for beginners. I recommend my former teacher's stuff. He Yun Lu has done good books. Linda Lee and I did a couple ourselves. She did the hard work, of course. Terry Walsh has written a couple of novels. Isn't that much out there? So of course you're not going to get any good. Get very good. It's much more than we thought it was. And we haven't even come close to providing a sufficient amount. That's my answer.
Correct. And as you said, for Farsi, it's the same issue that there's not
There's
much.
nothing there. There is nothing there, folks. Wow.
Exactly. And the person that you said, Tehran, he got the input, the optimal input from the conversations that he overheard.
He sure
and the
did.
taxi from 4 years old until college. So that's a very long span of time that it was done. Okay, next question. Maria is asking, what role do you think attitudes of teachers towards the students has on optimal input?
You really got to like the students. Sorry to say that. You really do. You have to want to communicate with them and find their interests and help them find good books. You got to be on their side. And it's not a case of pushing them harder. You got to help them have a good time and provide the input and really want to do it. And what I've seen of ESL students, oh my, ESL teachers, EFL teachers, ESL teachers especially, are a very compassionate group. They're really on the side of the students. Very often the ESL teacher is the only source of comprehensible input available, the only source of information about the culture. If we add to this the practical day-to-day information, helping them find the right books, wonderful. The first thing is to make sure that there are a lot of them in the library. I would begin with the library.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Next question is by Anna Joaquin, who I think was my professor during my master's program. So Professor Joaquin, hello. Good to see you here. So she's asking, perhaps I missed it, but in the study that you mentioned in which there was a perfect correlation between the amount of pleasure reading and the TOEIC scores, as the evidence that you put forth that optimal input, you note that the limitations that it was a small sample and where they were already motivated. So then, 1, how small of a sample was it? 2, how can you claim that the trick is not motivation, it is input if they were already motivated?
Okay, small sample, it was 8 of them, okay? And I wouldn't care if there were 2 of them. Piaget showed us the power of a small sample, okay? 1 child, for example. And again, this is conjecture. It's a hypothesis. And if it's disproven, the problem with the way science works, as you know, you can have all the proof you want, but 1 counterexample and you're dead. It's over. Einstein said all the studies in the world can support me. 1 study can disprove it. So this is very dangerous. Were they motivated? They were motivated to pass this class. I think what happened is the motivation to read and enjoy reading took over from the motivation to just get through the class. And this is conjecture. I really don't know. So fair question, don't know the answers, and I may be wrong. There's nothing wrong with being wrong, as you know. But this is really a good start. We've stated the question, and the job now is to see if it applies to other situations. And we think of cases like Tehran, this young man who speaks Farsi so well, it seems to apply there. It seems to tell us when immersion doesn't work and why classes are sometimes better, why some methods work better than others. The ones that will work will be the ones that provide optimal input. So I'm very happy about the hypothesis because it gives us a clear research direction. And if it's wrong, we've made progress.
Exactly. So it's one of the many studies that can support. Great. Next question. Deborah is asking, how can a student find the right optimal input for himself or herself? By pleasure reading only?
Oh, yeah. Yes. That's usually all you've got. Pleasure reading with a little bit of oral input, I think. I'll tell you my case and then what's happened to me, and then please see if it applies to you. When I went to Ottawa to be a visiting professor, my French was just kind of not that good. We say in Chinese, "mama hu," just kind of in the middle. I took the examination when I got there that students have to take. I wanted to see how I did, and I barely passed. I was barely considered good enough to be excused from the requirement, and I was doing okay. And I had gotten most of it by reading. Within a couple of weeks, interacting with people, my French comprehension got much better. On the exam, I forgot to say this, on the exam, on the reading part, I was well up there. On the listening part, I was way down. Had I retaken the listening part a month later, I would have been much better. Because once I did a little listening, the phonological system became absorbed and everything was much more comprehensible, and I started making more progress. The other thing I want to share with you from my life, and I'm inviting you to comment on whether this is true of yours. Once you've got it down with listening and you're okay, you're at this high intermediate stage, if you just read, you're going to make progress. The languages I know best are French and German, and I don't ever speak either of them to anybody. In Southern California, I don't run into many Germans, okay? But when I do, I'm okay because I'm always reading in French and German all the time. Went to the drugstore, the pharmacy, and the pharmacist, this was last month, I could tell by her accent, she was German. And of course I said, "Wo sind Sie her?" and all that. We started talking. And she asked me this great question. She said, "How long have you lived in the United States?" In other words, she thought I was a native speaker. I hadn't spoken German for probably 4 years, okay? But I've been reading it, and it stays from there. It keeps, the engine moving. And in fact, some people have said when I've gone back to Europe, having not been there, they say I'm actually better. Once you've acquired the basics of the phonological system, reading will push you farther all by itself without any listening. That's the answer. But that's a hypothesis.
Exactly. And since you asked about our cases, my case was very similar in terms of speaking English, because English is not my native language, and through reading is how I developed the proficiency and became an English teacher and English professor afterwards. So it's been that process for me as well.
That's the answer. Yes.
There you go. So Kim is asking, would you have suggestions for sources for intriguing reading for beginning level adult students?
No, I'm always on the lookout for it for myself. There have been a lot of efforts, people to come up with easy novels and easy things. The TPRS people have been active in this. There have been some really nice ones that I've enjoyed reading, but that's where the effort should be. Not nearly enough. Look at it this way. Beniko put together a library of 5,000 books, and she says you want to get good, you're going to read 300, and you want to get really good, you're going to do more. I've gone back to easy reading in Spanish. I have read some authentic things. I read Zorro, Isabel Allende, about 2 summers ago. Oh my God, is it good? It's amazing. Most of you know this already, but it's the kind of writing where even if you don't get everything, you don't care, you want to keep reading. You don't want to stop and look words up because it's just too compelling. But I've gone back, having learned all this from Benico, and I'm reading graded readers again. I'm getting better. I can tell I'm getting better because people are talking to me differently, etc. People I know. So
Amazing.
you need more. I don't know sources. I'm just glad people are now putting these things up. The problem is expense. The problem is money. If I want to read 100 graded readers in Spanish, it's going to be at least $500, $600. None of us has that kind of money just to go buy these things, etc. Even though you can claim it's tax deductible, it's still a fair amount. So my hope is more of these will be free online. Sorry, publishers. My loyalty is with the students. We've got to come up with free online that you can read easily in PDF, and they're really, really good. That's what the world needs.
Exactly. And to piggyback on that, in case anyone is looking into searching for Beniko Mason's website, Professor Mason's website is Beniko, BENIKO -MASON.net. And also there's a website, storiesfirst.org, that I think would be a good option in case
Absolutely.
anyone would love to.
And Nushan, a lot of people are saying they would really, really love a Krashen podcast, a Dr. Krashen podcast.
That would be amazing. I vote for it. I upload it. That would be amazing. And also Professor Krashen's website, sdkrashen.com.
Oh, yeah.
So everything is free there. So
yeah, trying to save you money.
Exactly.
You know, that's not very noble of me anyway. I have this website, sdkrashen.com. Thank you, Dr. Astari, for mentioning that, where I have a lot of my articles for free download.
Mm-hmm.
The journals are too expensive. Nobody can afford them. I can't afford them. I've canceled most of my subscriptions because I just don't have the money. Unless you live next door to a university library, you can't access the stuff. So I no longer publish in the regular journals. I publish in open access journals where the writer doesn't pay anything and the reader doesn't pay anything. And these are the ones that are changing the profession. When I write the articles and I try to make them short, you don't have to, give people the whole history of civilization. Just say what you need to say and get them around. I'm not the only one who's doing this. Others are doing this too. I would recommend a blog called Backseat Linguist, which is Jeff McQuillan's blog, where he reviews a great deal of research all the time, gives his opinion, and it's very clear, very comprehensible. And Benico's doing this, more and more of the scholars are doing this, and we have to do it or no one's going to be able to read our stuff.
Yes, amazing suggestions. Thank you very much. Next question, Lisa is asking, how do you encourage teenagers to read outside of class? We can provide some time for extensive reading in class, but it's not enough.
Well, this is happening. You have to find things that are interesting and comprehensible, obviously, that are fascinating, where they can't wait to see what's going to happen next. We've done this for small children. We still have the wonderful R.L. Stine, who is just a genius at making things interesting. We need to make these kinds of books more comprehensible for earlier stage acquirers. I'm going to leave that up to the brilliance of authors. I don't write fiction. People say I do, but I really don't, okay? This takes a special kind of person that most people are not. What Benico is doing, which I think is very clever, she's relying on the brilliance of the past to save money and find good stories. Her students in intermediate English classes read, when she tells stories in classes or when she writes them out, or her colleagues do, they're based on fairy tales. Usually the Grimm's brothers, okay, the Grimm brothers. They've already interesting, they keep your attention, etc. So I would look to these things for stories. But I have not really answered the question. What do you recommend for beginning kids, etc.? Tough question. It's up to us to produce these things, find them, and share them.
Thank you very much. Just to double check on time, Suzanne, are we doing well on time, or do we need Can we
Well,
go over any other questions?
It's up to Dr. Krashen how he feels.
As long as you agree, I get time and a half for overtime. Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
maybe a few more questions.
Let's do a few more.
Okay, great.
Yeah, let's go till 6:30. How's that?
That's
Okay.
fine.
Perfect. So Mariana is asking, is accent related to identity?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's what group you belong to. It's a marker of group membership, that's for sure. So I think very much it is, which is another reason why we can't change it so easily. Okay. You get the accent of the group you feel comfortable with. When you guys have had students like this, say early high school age, where they haven't been to the United States that long, maybe 4 or 5 years, and their accent is really good. And you find they've made friends and they connect with the friends. You don't get the accent of the country. My accent in Spanish is mostly Mexican, but it's not because I feel loyal to Mexico. Mexico's fine, or I prefer Mexico to Argentina. No, it's the accent my friends use, the friends I made who speak Spanish to me because they're from Mexico. That's how I talk because I connect to them. It's not the national thing. It's your friends mostly.
Exactly. It's very interesting that you say that because the books that we used for my English acquisition journey were mostly British English, and my teachers usually had the British English accent, but then I ended up with American accent. So it's probably something that I identified more with.
It's your friends. Yeah.
Probably, yes, exactly. Next question.
And okay, I got to add one more thing. Sorry. It can be one friend. It can be one or two friends, and that's enough.
Or even TV shows and characters that you identify with.
Yeah.
Because that's mostly the TV shows that we watched and the movies that we watched were Hollywood movies versus, the British English ones. Okay, Anna is asking, if there are no gifted learners, the problem is a problem of optimal input. Do you say that in general there are no gifted learners across different skills, talents, or will you say this is a specific to language learning? Also, then, is there no language aptitude?
There's no language aptitude. Exactly. Thank you. I'll say that in a paper and claim that the expression came from me, and I'll forget all about you. How's that? No, but I think you're absolutely right. Language. There's no such thing. We're all born to acquire language. The brain is very good at language acquisition. It's not very good at language learning, but it's very good at language acquisition. And the ability to pick languages up through acquisition never goes away. It's always with us. We have little accents and all that and little pieces, which is because of attitude, group membership, etc. So yeah, I think aptitude, we're putting aptitude out of business.
Great. One last question I think we have time for. Natalie is asking, are the polyglots you mentioned also fluent in the sense of being able to communicate in different everyday situations? I asked this because when I first came to the US, I spoke a lot of English in Brazil, and I thought I could understand everything so well. However, the first time I had to order something at a restaurant, I was so confused and felt like I couldn't speak English very well.
But eventually, once you were around and you got more used to the local variety, you had no trouble, right?
Yeah.
So it's just at the beginning when you're picking up the local variety, etc. There's no training you can do for that. It just comes with more acquisition and feeling comfortable in the environment in general. And, a lot of times I don't understand what people are telling me in restaurants. So.
Yeah, me neither. I'm like, what's that new dish that you have that you talked about? Yeah, that's true. So, do you think we should be done with questions, Suzanne?
So what we'll do is everybody, all of us, will stand up and give you an outstanding round of applause. Everybody
Okay, thank you.
stand up and give Dr. Krashen a round of applause.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. Merci.
So thank you so much for coming here today, and thank you everybody for participating in this event. We have more for tomorrow.
Oh, thanks for the invitation. Thanks, Dr. Ashtari, for helping out. I couldn't have done
Oh,
it
thank
without
you.
and the nice introduction. Oh,
So with that, let me see if I can put my video on. Doesn't matter. With that, what I'd like to say is tomorrow we have an agenda from 9 until 2, and we hope you'll come. And thank you for coming to this. That's all I have to say.
okay, thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for
It
coming.
was great. Love it. So good to be back with California TESOL again. Thank you. Thank you.
So please, let's thank our sponsors today too. Show Gear Productions, with which I want to say is that without them, we would not be having this training. They provided tech support for us, and they provided this platform. National Geographic, Pearson, and Sunburst Media donated money from regional conferences. And also, in addition, the CATESOL Educational Foundation, which also supports CATESOL with all of its speakers. So I just want to say that all our speakers at this virtual conference have come free. And so I'm so grateful that we are able to do this. And I think it's been a good day, and I think we'll have a good tomorrow. So just remember, if you're not a member, you should join us. We haven't raised our registration rates in years, and we don't plan on raising our registration rates. In fact, we plan on making our professional development much more affordable for the teachers. So do remember that we have a lot to offer you, and we'll see you tomorrow, bright and early. Bye now.